for anybody that's new on tonight, we are a 5-Elements company. This is a book written by the chairman. You all get it in your distributor kit. I am sure you've all read it. This book, 5 Elements of Success, is actually, this is the one strongest element that got me involved with Alpha. The fact that somebody who was very wealthy was living by a 5 Elements philosophy. So I just want to start with that. As I learned more about this company, I found out that the chairman and his company was the world leaders in medicinal mushrooms, which in all honesty, I had no idea what medicinal mushrooms were all about. I kind of heard about them, but I never knew what they were. And of all those medicinal mushrooms, our chairman is considered the king of Lingji. In other words, Lingji is also considered the most potent of all the medicinal mushrooms. Now, I had heard of Lingji and Reishi when I studied Taoism, because in Taoism, nearly 3,000 years ago, this was one of their key superfoods, what they call their superfoods, foods from nature, that provided extraordinary health, even aging bodies. Our product lines, I just want to go over this because you'll see how it will lead into it. I just want to preface what tonight's talk is going to be, but we basically have 4 product lines and 4 ways to market. And the very first way, the most basic way, the way that hits the general broad market in America, are just what Gene and Steve were just talking about. They were talking about the power of coffees and teas. And I just want to tell you, this is like a little confession I want to make, but I didn't really start drinking the coffee as a regular habit till about 3 months ago. Now, I've been with Alpha about 3 years, but I just never thought that the coffee could be that tasty and that strong. But what I did is I gave it a try about 3 months ago, and now I'm hooked. My body just must have just developed a huge affinity for the mushrooms. And I'll tell you, the other thing that I do is I also, the hot water that I use to heat up my coffee is the tea. So I make 2 bags in a quart of tea every day, and I use that tea to make my coffee. So I get a double hit of the mushrooms, and I really can feel the difference. The second line of products are our 5-element formulations, and that's going to be one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. But I'll kind of not say too much about this, other than the fact that this belongs to a market that is going to be familiar with supplementation, but even more familiar with, or more interested or curious about, the 5 elements. And what we're gonna do tonight is really reinforce this incredible marketing tool and branding that we have of the only supplementation out there right now that's designed in 5 elements to the everyday person. I don't know if you can appreciate this, but there's just nothing on the market right now that has that. There's nothing developed in 5 elements. And the guest speaker that's going to speak tonight, actually, before he knew about Alpha and got involved, he was making his own formulations based on those 5 elements. And I hope he shares his story when he learned about a company that already had thought about these 5 elements and created them in formulations. Our next product line is one that came in recently, about a year ago, and it is one of the most potent, strongest forms of the medicinal mushrooms in the form of Lingji and cordyceps on the planet. These are the most intense, concentrated form and powerful form of the mushrooms, the spores themselves, almost like the seeds and the eggs of the mushrooms themselves. And you can see that this product line has a different kind of market. These are going to be people who have compromised health issues, have weakened immune systems, or people that just don't want to have anything happening to immune system ever, and it fortifies their immune system. I recommend something like the Lingji and sports for anybody over the age of 40, which is when our body begins to kind of reverse the aging process. And then finally, we have our lifestyle products. And here's another confession I have to make. First of all, I love the eye mask. I will not travel anywhere on a plane without my eye mask, because once I tried the eye mask for long trips, I never got jet lag. And every time I slip that eye mask on in a plane, no matter what part of the day it is, I just knock out, go to sleep. The sheets, I always thought were, wow, just I can't justify paying that much for sheets. But Alfé provides two to three times a year that it actually goes on a discount. And I actually bit the bullet and tried these, and I cannot imagine ever sleeping on anything else at this point ever again. I could not believe the power and the rest and the intensity of sleep that I get from these. So these are basically the 4 product lines we have, and I would say for the first time in my life, I am hooked onto every single one of these. And I think it's made a whole different, it's made a big difference in how I talk to people about these products, how I feel about these, and also the different people that I talk to. I have four different kind of markets that I can approach. So I just want everybody to be aware of this, because this is going to be it's very important to understand our whole product line and then how it's going to fit in at the right time, at the right place for people. Now, I've talked about the coffees and the teas, which I find are something I don't live with. But one thing I want to say are the sample packs. And this is, ever since Alfé came out with sample packs, I always keep a minimum of 20 to 25 each month in my artillery. And I give these out. I always make sure I have some sample packs with me for a lot of reasons. These coffees and teas are the easiest way to invite people to look at the bigger picture of Alfé. And that's what I want you to look at. I never really hand these out with the idea of people buying coffees and teas. I kind of make it clear that I'm in a marketing business, and I would love people to try this, and I can guarantee them that these are the healthiest coffees and teas that they will ever probably drink in their life. But I don't want to tell them what it is until they try it, and then I promise to give them the big picture. And that's basically the way I get people to look at the whole picture of Alfé. I get them to try these coffees and teas and give me their honest feedback. It doesn't really matter how much they like them or how much they don't, but I do deliver on the promise of showing them the whole Alfé opportunity, which then talks about the medicinal mushrooms and the entire product line. So I have found for me that the sample packs are a really great, easy way to introduce the everyday person to Alfé. Now, having said that, we're going to go back to the topic of the evening. I don't want to take too much time, but the interesting thing about our 5-element formulations is that they are based on 5 elements: fire, earth, metal, water, wood. And they have 5 kind of different names: revitalize, rejuvenate, calm, nourish, cleanse, soothe. In addition to that, they also have 5 corresponding organs: the lungs, the kidneys, the heart, the liver, and the stomach or the spleen area. So we have really 3 ways. Think about that. We have 3 ways of defining our 5-element product line, and that can be sometimes kind of confusing. Well, nobody said that the 5-element system is that simple. But when we get people that come along into our organization, like our guest speaker tonight, that's as impassioned about the 5 elements as I am, I love when they can give more of a picture about the power of these 5 elements, because I'm convinced that the more that we learn about this special, ancient, holistic system of health, the more we're going to appreciate it, and the more we're going to be able to, at one point in our life, be able to communicate and disseminate these products in a very interesting, curious way, and at the same time, a very knowledgeable way of introducing people to this ancient form of health. I don't want to say too much about the G-Cell, but it's there. You know about it. These are our 5 products, our 4 product lines, our 4 ways to market. And we're going to have our guest speaker. And before we bring him on, I'm going to have Lisa Ann Stahlbaum, his sponsor, his We did a three-way call, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jeffrey through that three-way call. And I would love for Lisa Ann, his sponsor, to come on and just give an introduction for Jeffrey. So Lisa, bring yourself on and please introduce Jeffrey for us.
Right. I am so excited to introduce Jeffrey. Jeffrey Kinnear is the owner and operator of Erie Oriental Medicine, and he's an acupuncturist. He's been studying Chinese herbalism for, I think he said, 25 years. So I'm really honored and thrilled to have him be part of this Alpha Vision and to listen to some of the wisdom that he has to offer.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the warm welcome, and really pleased to be here. As Anton had said, I'm a practitioner of Oriental medicine, so I'm allowed to make my own herbal formulas. I have about 350 single herbs in my pharmacy, and then I have about 50 or so formulas that are all put together, and we can adjust those for each individual. So ideally with Chinese herbalism, we would take the pulse, look at someone's tongue, ask them a whole bunch of questions, and generate a formula that is appropriate for them for a week. I usually do about a week's worth. And then when they come back in the next visit, you reevaluate and see what we need to adjust or change to help them take the next step. The 5-element formula is already being worked out, fills a very special need. As Anton had mentioned earlier, each of the organs, we call them the zongfu. There's 5 solid and 5 hollow organs that work together, and they are connected to the 5 elements. The 5-element theory itself is much broader than just the medicine or for health. It ties all of the Chinese philosophies together. It ties together the feng shui, the Chinese astrology, all of these different aspects. So once you begin to understand the 5 elements, it's really a system of correspondence. So we can take anything and relate it into its 5 parts, 5 constituent parts. It's a measure of any cyclic process. It's more about the energy than it is matter. A lot of people from the West get confused when they see 5 elements, and of course we have the periodic table and we have a whole lot more than 5 elements, but they're not really about elements of matter. They're about elements of a process. And in particular, for health and healing, those things can be related to the seasons and the calendar. As the weather changes, so does our body, so does our blood. Our blood gets thicker in the winter and thinner in the summer to help us stay warmer, cooler. And if we can use those 5-element formulas to help facilitate that process, we can keep ourselves strong. In Chinese medicine, we call it our wei qi. There's a defensive level of energy that protects us. And that's how they look at the immune system, like a shield around our body. And facilitating that change, that transformation for each season helps to strengthen that wei qi and keep us from becoming sick or tired or drained. In particular, in school, one of the things that I studied extensively was the timing and the Chinese calendar and the seasons. There are a couple of ways of relating the 5 elements to the seasons. There's a more popular 5-season system, and in that system, they have an extra season that they call late summer to represent the earth element. The other system divides the year into equal parts, and it does it by putting the solstices and equinoxes dead center of the seasons instead of at the beginning. So in the West, we look at the December 21st being the beginning of winter. In this system, the Chinese the Chinese system of the 4 seasons, we are already well into winter. And what this allows us to do is to start harmonizing with that energy that's coming down from heaven and up from earth with the 5-element formulas before the climate has changed, so our bodies are ready to resist these changes, these fluctuations in the weather, and facilitate that blood to start changing either thick or thin to what's coming next. I did make a handout, and I can put that up there. What would be the best way to share that?
The way you want to do that is, you see where it says share screen, that little green box. You can share the screen, and then it'll show you where that chart is. You can pick and choose that chart, and it'll appear, and it'll appear to all of us.
Okay. All right.
And I can tell you when it's up. We see it. Beautiful.
Okay. And can we see the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
It's a little big.
You can, if you have that's right. There you go.
There we go. Okay, so it's a little graphic representation of those things. And when we study a lot of the ancient cultures, the Celtic culture and the Roman culture, they had holidays and festivals all set up with these seasons, and the solstices and the equinoxes marked a lot of those things. But it's important to remember that the equinox means equal distant night and day. So we have that twice a year, and that has to do with the sun's position compared to the earth, and it marks the middle of the season in this system instead of the beginning. That's always resonated with me a lot more so. And so we can see, like right now on the legend, that winter solstice is December 21st, but winter actually starts November 7th. So we're into the winter season now. So if you started with the kidney formula, the water element, to start cultivating that energy, then harmonize with it before we start getting the colder days, the snow flying, and all those other things. At least up north here, we have all that. In addition to that, then we have the earth element, which in this system shows up 4 times a year, but for a 2-week period. So that gives us 4 times a year to be able to detox or cleanse or harmonize our digestive tract. The stomach, spleen, and earth element in Chinese medicine is responsible for what we call our postnatal qi. So all the energy that we would get from the food that we eat, we process through the spleen, pancreas, and the stomach. And so paying more attention to that and dividing that over 4 times a year gives us more time to give the earth element attention and to harmonize it. One of the things that I tell my patients, all the time is anything that works twice as hard works half as long. So if we give our stomach a chance to rest, our digestive tract, spleen, stomach, even the large intestine, then gives it a chance to renew itself. And so during those periods, the 4 earth buffers, we could use the earth element formula and simplify our diet so that we can strengthen it, give it a chance to rest and renew, and then prepare for the next season. So the earth buffer in the system is a point in the year when things are at their least fluctuation. They're not going upward, downward, inward, or outward like the other elements are. The earth is the center, and it's the structure. So in Chinese medicine, they call the earth element the center of the body. There's a formula called Rectify, the center formula, which goes to the spleen and stomach and helps strengthen that pillar, the digestion, and then all of the postnatal chi, all the energy we would get from the food that we eat from that point forward. In addition to this other, I have another little clip here. Let me see if I can pull that up. Oops. Nothing there. Where'd my screen go?
Okay, you may just escape, press escape,
Okay.
upper right. And let's see, you may have to stop the screen share and start it again if you have it in a different location. Okay.
Okay.
And if everybody could please type their questions in the chat area, if you have any.
There we go. So this is a little bit of information about how they've arrived at these dates and how they view this calendar system as opposed to the other 5 season system. So if you take the average year, 365 days, and divide it by 5, you get 73 days. You divide that by 4 seasons, you get 91 days per season. The difference between the 91 per season and the 73 is 18, so they use the 18 then for that Earth buffer period. So that, to not go too far down the rabbit hole, was the main points I wanted to touch on. So if anybody does have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
One question, gosh, okay, well, I'm going to take advantage and just get my questions off. The 4 Earth buffers, Jeffrey, would you recommend would you recommend fasting during those periods?
Yeah, it's a really good time to fast and do like a khichdi fast or something like that. From the Ayurvedic tradition, they use rice and mung beans and cumin, coriander, and turmeric with a little bit of ghee. I use a fast or a cleanse called Tiaohe, which means harmonize the liver. And it's a 15-day program, which fits in there nicely to get the body draining and clean out the colon. And even if you only do that twice a year instead of 4 times a year, you have ample opportunity to do that. You can also do things like the master cleanse, like the lemon and maple syrup and cayenne pepper during that period. And even if you do it for a weekend over that 2-week period, you get that process going.
Thank you. One last question, and I'm going to open up our chat area here, and that is, how should we rectify in our minds the popular way that the 5 elements have been given in terms of formulations? Even Alpha gives it in their journal in terms of that Indian summer for the Soothe formula. How do we reconcile both systems in our mind?
That season is very pertinent to specific areas in China. China being a very large country and existing for a very long period of time, there are different cultures, and we kind of lump them all together and consider them all part of one. When certain classics, like in Chinese medicine, the Bible of Chinese medicine is the Huangdi Neijing Classic. And it talks about the late summer in there, and that's where a lot of that is based on. And that's for a region in China that has that hot, sticky period at the end of summer. The elements are, they're very mutable. One of Dr. Tan's lectures, he's a famous acupuncturist he passed away recently, but out in San Diego, he was talking about one classic where there was 6 elements at one point that you considered stone an element, and he talked about wood being with the lungs instead of with the liver. So there have been different thought processes throughout the history of Chinese medicine And we want to be careful that we remember that they're relationships and not absolutes. So you can use that earth element in a different way instead of very rigid and very structured.
Gotcha. And Jeffrey, in terms of, there's many of us distributors here that we have a very simple, we want a simple form, way of thinking of the 5 elements.
Mm-hmm.
How would you best recommend that we, reconcile, it's a very, because I know it's a complex system, but how can we reconcile, or how can we at least understand how we present these 5 elements to people that we want to make aware of these? What's the simplest way to do that works in integrity with the system in your mind?
I think the 5 elements are represented in that the hexagram, the star pattern, and you have the two cycles, the Shing and the Ke, the creation and the control cycle.
Mm-hmm.
In practice, I like to move earth to the middle, and then you have fire above, water below, and wood and metal.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of the classics, and a lot of, or the other way to look at that is then you have basically yin-yang pairs, and you have earth that is always there and always supports things. And that helps simplify it even more so, that earth gives us everything that we need. It allows the other 4 elements to do what they do here on earth. And as far as studying them goes, it's good to look into like the feng shui, the geomancy, and some of the Chinese astrology to get a better understanding than to limiting it just to the medicine or the health aspect. Some of the better books that really helped my understanding of the 5 elements were feng shui books instead of Chinese medicine books. But it is a process. It's a process of looking at life differently, looking at these elements in the processes of everyday life and trying to identify with them. As with some of the yin-yang theories, when you have discussions in them, it's very difficult because they're relative.
Right.
When people are talking about yin, I always request that they say in relationship to what? Because you can have it backwards and be right. They're not absolutes. It's a system of correspondence and relationship. So exploring those in everyday life and having conversations with people that understand them, I think, are one of the best ways to go about it. But looking at the relationship, usually they're taught with like a table of correspondence, getting a simple table of correspondence and just adding to it, exploring things in your life to figure out how you would put this part of this process. Like one of the exercises I had my son do was analyze picking up the TV remote to change the channel and break that down into 5 element terms. And just explore things like that in everyday life, I think, is the best.
Sure. Jeffrey, what about Alfei? As a professional that you are in this field, what was it about Alfei that attracted you, that drew you in and it got you to want to be with Alfei?
Really looking at the quality of the process. The company that I mainly deal with is called KPC. It's Kaiser Pharmaceutical Company, and they are pharmaceutical grade. They have halal and kosher and USDA and CGMP certification and ISO certification, and Alfei has all of those things also. So understanding that quality and taking that burden out of the way. The Ganoderma mushroom grows here in Pennsylvania, and I have friends who wildcrafted. I have some that was picked locally, but it's about an 8-hour process to try to grind that up and cook that. And to be able to open up a little packet and put some hot water with it and get that same level of nutrition and herbal tonification day to day really is appealing, and it's easier for my clients to be able to think in those terms instead of telling someone that they have to spend hours, hours at a time cooking and making things. Just the quality control really, and the thought process is looking at the formulas and how they put them together. They're safe for recommending to just about anyone. There's always things to watch for, and understanding someone's constitution, their strengths and weaknesses in their body helps navigate even more so. But studying the formulas thus far, they have done an excellent job at making sure that they've paired tonic herbs together that work well together and aren't going to create an excess in the body. With ginseng and ginseng products, sometimes you can get a condition they call false fire. You get so much yang and qi, it rises upward and it'll create a fuzzy headache-like feeling right behind your forehead. I've experienced that myself from years of experimentation, especially with like the Korean ginseng and the warmer ginsengs. But the way that they put the formulas together, there's very little concern about those things arising for people.
Wow, that's a great endorsement. Thank you. So beginning with our questions from our field, Amanda Kingsley asked, do you recommend supporting the strong, and she has in parentheses, opposite system in any way?
Strong.
Yeah, Amanda, maybe you could come on and explain your question. I wasn't clear on the question.
Sure. So we notice, because I've been with the company almost 3 years, so I'll notice like for instance, right now, there's a lot coming up in the opposite season. So like the spring, summer. So, and then like, so the organs that are strongest right now,
yes,
when they're hyperactive in people, we're also noticing certain conditions and symptoms come up. So do you recommend paying attention to that at all? I liked what you said about maybe in that buffer zone, support the next season with food, and the greatest weakness with the formula. And so my first thought was maybe support the opposite season with food as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can do that. There are the principles at work when something is excess, something else is usually deficient. That's yin and yang rules and principles. And those things do flare up. So when one element is strong, the other one can be suppressed or overcome. And that's part of that pentagram that we see, the control cycle, things overacting on or reversing on the other organs. If you aren't struggling with big health imbalances and you follow that cycle with nature, it eventually will correct itself. But if you're having stronger symptoms, stronger reactions, or things like you mentioned, like things flaring up, then you might want to look at even stronger formulas to get that back into balance a little quicker and then follow the cycle. In the Huangdi Neijing, they talk about using the different flavors, and it doesn't actually follow suit with the flavor, like the liver flavor is sour. And so a little bit of sour is good for the liver. A lot of sour will damage the liver. The spleen flavor is sweet. A little bit of sweet will strengthen the spleen, and a lot of sweet will damage it. So we see that in like diabetics. You have a lot of sugar in your diet, you're increasing your risk of insulin issues, dependence or resistance, and causing problems. But they will use a different set of flavors to strengthen, and it doesn't follow the exact pattern that we might think. So when people are having problems like that, it's a good idea to figure out what your Chinese medicine diagnosis would be, and then you can use foods and you can use acupuncture if you're not afraid of needles and things like that to accelerate that process and get things back into balance a little quicker, and then we can better maintain the balance with staying in harmony with the seasons. Yeah.
Great. Hopefully that answered a little bit of your question. That made a lot of sense to me. Tanya asked, is it recommended to shift the formulas you take based on the season? So again, it's kind of the same question. If so, would this be more favorable over taking one of the longevity packs? Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the longevity packs, but they are combinations that were put together, the stress formula, the vitality, and maybe you can answer that question based on what you know, Jeff.
Yeah, personally, I think that going with the seasons has to do with the energies from heaven and earth. And the process of longevity is a little different intention. If we stay in harmony with the seasons, we are fostering health and longevity and creating that balance at the same time. The longevity packs, I'm slightly familiar with. What I would do is work those things in so you don't have to take the seasonal balances through the entire season. And you can also, and to kind of go back to Amanda's question, you can also do that first part up until the solstice or equinox with one treatment strategy, and then that second part with a different strategy, because after the earth buffer, that season starts, and you can energetically feel the change in the air. You can feel the weather and the season starting to change, but it's not abundantly obvious. That energy is just starting to accumulate. So if we would tonify during that period, we would be strengthening that element. If we would use something that would counteract that, like using the opposite formula at that time, we could reduce it. So if going into spring, if we had a liver condition which was determined to be excess, we could use the lung formula at the beginning of the spring season to help slow down the accumulation of that energy. And then on the second part of that season, we could use the liver formula to strengthen the liver instead of having to do it all one way. So if your goal was longevity, you could do the seasonal formula in the morning and something else in the afternoon. And there are much more elaborate timing systems. There is a cycle of 60. It goes through a 60-day cycle, and each day is aligned with an element. There's a 10-day cycle and a 12-day cycle in addition to the 60-day cycle. So there are ways that we can get very, very precise with these 5-element formulas that they've already figured out for us. I hope that,
Wow.
without going too
No,
deep.
That's okay. It's always instigating new thoughts. A question from Samantha is, actually we answered the question from Samantha. I asked so far. This comes from B. Willow Herbert. She wants to know, for people who follow a neo-pagan path, the earth buffers fall right. Oh, I think she's stating this and not asking a question. She says that for people who follow a neo-pagan path, the earth buffers fall right when the cross-quarter days occur. I'm not sure what the cross-quarters occur. You might clarify that, which are especially in the Celtic and Druid paths and holidays of most importance and most power. Just fascinating correlations. I'm sure you can appreciate that. Many of us can't. We're not I'm not quite aware of the Celtic and Druid paths. But just a comment that she makes. Art D'Agostino asks, how do you relate 5 elements to the 3 treasures cultivation? I'm assuming he's talking about the Jing, the Qi, and the Shen.
The the Jing, Qi, and Shen.
Can you explain what those 3 are, just so the people know?
Sure. In a lot of the Taoist traditions, they look at the 3 treasures. They call them Jing, which is our essence. Jing it's almost like stem cells. It's super concentrated you, and we use it for health and longevity, and we use it for healing and repairing. And then we have Qi, which is the active force of Jing, and then we have Shen, which is more like our spirit. So one of the analogies that I found really useful is the analogy of a candle. The Jing would be the wax and the wick. The Qi would be the flame when the candle was lit, and the Shen would be the heat and the light given off by the candle. So that's what would affect the room. So when we walk into the room, people take notice of us. They notice your presence. That's your Shen that you're giving off. The 5 element formulas and the 5 elements to relate them to Jing, Qi, and Shen would be to tonify each of those organs so that you're optimizing the extraction of Qi from the food that we eat, the postnatal Qi, to concentrate it into Jing and to keep those organs as healthy as possible so that we can concentrate more and use less of our Jing essence so that we can have health and longevity. So in Chinese medicine, that Jing is used, again, for health and longevity. It's used for procreation. So the Jing in men is the sperm, and the Jing in women, it exists in the blood as the blood ebbs and flows through the menstrual cycle. And we borrow little bits of that. Part comes from your mother, part from your father, and it comes together and resides in a very special place in our body, kind of right between the 2 kidneys. So in particular, of the 5 element formulas, the kidney formula, and again, the wisdom of what they've done there's one for men and one for women, because our essence has different characteristics between men and women. The kidney formula would be the most important for creating and harvesting the Jing, or storing the Jing. And then to be able to motivate that or to circulate that, we have the heart, which is the opposite, the fire and water, to bring that Jing up and help circulate it through the body. So the 5 element formulas, by just using them to strengthen each of the organs, would indirectly help with the cultivation of Jing, Qi, and Shen.
Great, excellent. A question, and I just want to draw up a, let's see if I can get a copy of this. A question that somebody had was about the creation versus the controlling or destruction cycle, and I was trying to get a picture of it so that you could explain it. Let's see if I can do that for you, Jeff. And
Okay.
I think I have one here. Let's share this screen, and if you could kindly explain what that correlation for people so that they get an idea. Here's kind of a picture of it.
Okay. Was the question like?
Okay, so people, as you see, we have arrows that are going in a circular motion. That would be, you correct me if I'm wrong, the creation cycle.
Yes.
And then we have arrows that are cutting in the middle for a star. Those are the controlling cycles, right?
Yes.
Could you just explain just those cycles for people so that they get that fundamental understanding of the 5 elements?
Okay. So the outside cycle is the creation cycle. It's the more natural order, where water feeds wood. So if we water a tree or water a plant in nature, that strengthens the wood element that the plant grows. wood, if we put wood on fire, the wood will feed the fire. Fire, as it burns, it leaves ash behind, and ash is equated with the earth element, creating earth itself. Earth gets compacted and compressed, and from inside of earth comes metal, and the metal, they say, melts into the water. So that would be the more harmonious cycle with nature. And then the pentagram on the inside is the destruction cycle, the overacting or control cycle. So if we have water in excess, it can overact on the fire element, skipping the wood element and suppressing it. So we use the control or the destruction cycle to help reduce something that is out of control. When we break these things down, every element can affect every other element depending on the relationships. And there's a couple more that they don't have on this chart. These are the two most basic ones, but there's other relationships between these elements, and it's a formula for us to decide how to solve a problem. So if we have too much fire, we would want to turn up the water. If we have too much earth element, we can use the wood element to break that up. We can use the fire element to melt metal, and we can use the metal element to chop wood.
So Jeff, so an example might be if I had a overactive, let's say, fire element or heart issue where I have a lot of impatience and say a lot of impatience and hastiness in me, and I could actually bring that energy down by bringing in more water element to it. Is that correct? Is that
Correct. Yes.
kind of an idea of how I would do it?
Yes. Yeah, so we could use the 5 elements in those, and that kind of goes back to Amanda's question. We can do those things out of season to help rebalance things quicker. That just involves getting a lot more involved in understanding the 5 elements and being sure what's in excess or what's deficient and what we need to pay attention to.
Yeah. And you know, Jeffrey, one thing I want to say, I've always called this an intuitive science. In other words, when I first was introduced to this, you know, something sounded logical to it, but something also sounded like I could never really master this as a science.
Mm-hmm.
Only until I started to feel it and at the same time get more knowledge like we're getting tonight did it begin to make sense. You know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
I don't know if you could explain that phenomena, but this is what I would suggest to everybody, that if you're looking for an exact science on how this works and leaving out this feeling, this intuitive feeling, I think something gets lost in the translation.
Yes.
Would you agree with that, Jeffrey?
Yes. One of the earlier classes that I took in college, the teacher made a statement very early in the semester, and it kind of caught me off guard. She said, Chinese medicine isn't a science, it's a cosmology. And exploring what that meant and the significance of that statement really changed my perception of things, because I was looking at it as science and wanted this research to back it up and be able to solve all these problems with this. And it's just, as you said, there's an intuitive part, and it has more to do with man's relationship to the environment around him and how that environment impacts us, which is why the seasonal attunement is so useful to get us in sync with the energy. The energy in us does the same thing that it does in a tree in nature. In the wintertime, things go inward, they're downward in the roots. And in the springtime, it starts to come up the tree and upward and outward. In the summertime, everything's in full bloom and full blossom. And in the fall, it starts to retreat and go inward and back downward into the ground.
Mm.
So our qigong, our exercises, our food, if we change it to harmonize or to support that process, then we become more in harmony with nature itself. We become more balanced.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Wow, that really, really, I just think we have so much to learn about this, and you are. I just love the way you talk about it and give us just so much understanding, and at the same time an appreciation of how the philosophy of these very tangible medicinal mushrooms, when they're put together, how powerful that is in terms of something that we have that is not out there. You know, it's just not out there. And I'm sure that I can speak for the rest of the people that are here. It gives us a greater appreciation of what we have here. We may not figure this out totally. We may not have it clear in our minds, but I think as we begin to take these formulations and learn more trainings like this, that we begin to see this picture that takes over, that seems to make so much sense. And there's almost a genius to how this was discovered and how it was looked at. I mean, I always just find it fascinating that how did they figure out such simple things in a very kind of esoteric way, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just leave it for any more questions that you have that we can ask Jeffrey. Now's your opportunity because we have a few minutes left. If you don't have any more questions, we're going to kind of wrap it up. I want to thank you, Jeffrey, for your knowledge, your wisdom. And I think I can speak also for everybody that your energy is, very calming, very unassuming, and it's a pleasure to hear you talk about this. And I think I'm looking forward to having many more talks that you can give on the subject.